Most intentional diet and exercise interventions are successfully able to promote weight loss in the short term. However, this usually results in a regain of body weight shortly after. This research review shows the average time course of weight regain after a weight loss intervention. As we can see, around 30% of lost weight is regained within 1 year, and after 5 years, around 80% of the weight that was lost is regained. So to make weight loss permanent, we probably shouldn't be focusing on doing a quote-unquote diet for X number of weeks. Rather, we need to implement lifestyle changes in our everyday routine. Weight loss and maintenance of weight loss will then be a byproduct of your lifestyle changes as opposed to the sole objective. In this video, we will cover some practical lifestyle tips to help promote weight loss. First and foremost, we need to explain how weight loss is achieved. Essentially, this comes down to energy balance, how much energy we intake versus how much we expend. Energy intake refers to the total number of calories we consume, while energy expenditure refers to the total amount of calories we burn. Energy intake comes from our diet, or what we eat and drink each day. The total calories from all the foods and drinks we consume each day makes up energy intake. Energy expenditure, on the other hand, is a little more complex. It is comprised of 3 primary components: our basal metabolic rate, the thermic effect of feeding, and movement. Movement can then be further broken down into NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and exercise. NEAT refers to non-intentional movements, such as fidgeting, as well as movements required for daily tasks, such as walking around the home. Whereas exercise refers to intentional movement, such as playing sport, lifting in the gym, or jogging. And the net balance of this equation, on average over time, will determine our change in body weight long term. So the strategies we will discuss today are in some way to help us promote a lower energy intake or a higher energy expenditure to tip the balance in favor of weight loss. The first tip is to regularly take and record your body weight over time. The reason for this is to make you aware of your current energy balance state. Your trend in body weight over time is the truest indicator of your energy balance state. In other words, whether you are in a calorie surplus, deficit, or at maintenance. This will tell us if your current diet and exercise habits are promoting weight loss and at what rate. This can then inform us whether or not changes to your behaviors are required, or if you just need to stick with what you are already doing. Without weighing yourself, it can be difficult to know if you are on track or not, in the short term at least. You may be following a certain diet or consuming a particular calorie intake with the goal to lose weight. But if your body weight isn't trending downward on average over time, you are by definition not in a calorie deficit. It is recommended to weigh yourself in the morning before you have had anything to eat or drink. You can then weigh yourself every day if you like, but 2 to 4 times per week is generally what I would suggest. Weighing yourself too frequently can sometimes cause you to make impulse decisions due to daily fluctuations in body weight due to water and glycogen stores. Because of these natural fluctuations, we don't want to look at one weigh-in to the next. Instead, we want to observe the long-term trend over multiple weeks and months to determine our true energy balance. With this data, you can then make changes to your diet and exercise habits to achieve the energy balance state and the rate of body weight change you are aiming for. For example, this graph shows long-term body weight trends over multiple months. Although there are fluctuations from weigh-in to weigh-in, the overall trend is downward. This means they are in fact in a calorie deficit on average over time. However, if you were to zoom in and only look at a couple weeks of body weight tracking, the overall trend isn't clear. The next tip to help promote weight loss is to get enough sleep. While sleep doesn't have a direct influence on energy intake or expenditure, it seems to negatively impact both diet and exercise behaviors. This can then inhibit our ability to achieve the energy balance state we are aiming for, and inhibit us from our weight management goals. In terms of energy intake, this study explored the effects of sleep restriction on calorie intake. 12 healthy adults underwent 2 separate 21-day sleep experiments in a room with free access to food, separated into 3 stages. On one occasion, they were given 9 hours of time in bed per night for the entire 21 days. On the other occasion, they were given an acclimation period of 4 days with 9 hours of time in bed, then an experimental phase of 14 days with only 4 hours of time in bed. And lastly, a recovery period of 3 days with 9 hours in bed. It was found that average energy intake was around 2,700 calories during the initial 4-day acclimation period in both trials. However, during the experimental phase, the restricted sleep resulted in subjects consuming an extra 258 calories per day. This then went back down once they were given more sleep during the recovery period. So, although the reasons are not entirely clear, restricted sleep tends to cause people to consume more total calories. And if this is consistently observed over time, it makes it less likely to stick to a calorie deficit and lose weight over time. Furthermore, restricted sleep also seems to make exercise more effortful. This was seen in this study, which compared the effects of sleep restriction on exercise performance and perceived fatigue. 10 females with at least 6 months lifting experience performed 4 resistance training sessions over a 9-day period on 2 separate occasions. On one occasion, they were given 8 or more hours in bed to sleep as normal. On the other occasion, they were restricted to only 5 hours in bed per night. It was found that their total volume load per session was similar during both phases, indicating that lifting performance wasn't significantly inhibited. However, sleep restriction increased the subject's perceived exertion of each training session, shown in the orange, indicating that it took more effort to complete each workout. And subjects also reported a greater training distress score, which is a subjective rating of stress, fatigue, and depressive symptoms during the restricted sleep protocol. So, although poor sleep might not directly inhibit exercise performance, it seems to make exercise more effortful. This might mean that you put less effort into exercise, or that you simply skip planned exercise sessions. In either case, it is probably not ideal for long-term weight management. The next tip to promote weight loss is to simply cook or prepare foods at home more often. When preparing meals ourselves, we are more likely to consume foods that are more conducive for maintaining a healthy body weight most of the time. Whereas when we consume the majority of meals from takeaway or restaurants, we would usually consume a higher calorie intake on average over time. This was seen in this cross-sectional study, which examined eating patterns and diet quality among adults in the United States. Across a sample of around 9,000 participants, it was found that those who cooked at home more frequently consumed a lower average calorie intake per day on average. When cooking at home 1 time per week or less, people tended to naturally consume about 100 calories per day more than those who cooked 2 to 5 times per week, and around 140 calories more than those who cook 6 to 7 times per week. While this might not seem like a major difference, 140 extra calories per day over the course of months and years can result in significant differences in body weight and accumulation of body fat. Another cross-sectional study explored the associations between consuming home-cooked meals with diet quality and health outcomes among adults in the United Kingdom. While total calorie intake wasn't compared, it was found that those who consumed more home-cooked meals consumed more fruit and vegetables per day on average. They also had a lower prevalence of excess body fat compared with those who consume fewer home-cooked meals per day. So, generally speaking, if we were to cook more frequently or prepare our own meals more often, we are more likely to naturally consume slightly less total calories per day, and more importantly, throughout the entire week. This is therefore going to promote weight loss or a maintenance of a lower body weight. As an extension of cooking more, the next tip is to meal prep. This refers to pre-preparing meals so that they are ready to consume with very little additional preparation. In most cases, we tend to resort to eating the most convenient option available at any given time. And this often ends up being restaurants, takeaway food, or food from a convenience store. The issue with this is that these food choices are usually highly calorie dense and highly palatable. This promotes a higher energy balance, making it more difficult to lose weight or maintain a healthy body weight. This is where meal prep can have a benefit. Pre-preparing meals can make it more convenient to consume foods that are more conducive for maintaining a healthy body weight. If you have pre-prepared meals readily available at home, work, or school, then this is a quick and convenient option. And since you are cooking the food yourself, you can control the ingredients based on your personal taste and nutrition preferences. So now this becomes a highly convenient meal that can promote healthy eating habits and promote a lower total calorie intake. Here are some practical tips for meal prepping. Cook foods that you enjoy eating, otherwise you will likely end up consuming something else to satisfy your desire for tasty food. Cook foods that can be stored for multiple days, not foods that need to be eaten immediately. Curries, stir-fries, stews, pastas, and rice dishes all work well for meal prep. Don't cook too many servings of the same meal. For most people, we don't want to eat the same meal for too many days in a row, otherwise we start to crave something else. Cooking in batches of 3 to 5 servings is a good practical guide. Have a few different meals readily available at any given time. This gives a little more variety to your diet so that you aren't always eating the same foods. The next tip I have is to track your total daily step count. Your total daily step count is a general indicator of your physical activity levels. It accounts for all forms of step-based activity throughout the entire day, including intentional exercise and NEAT. This is probably going to be a more accurate indicator of total activity levels compared with just prescribing specific exercise sessions. While cardio or other exercise are certainly ways to increase activity levels, it only accounts for a small proportion of the entire day and less so of the entire week. And in many cases, our NEAT levels decrease as a result of performing intentional exercise. As intentional exercise levels increase, we are often unintentionally a little more lazy for the rest of the day. So even though more activity was performed with the exercise session, our NEAT levels might drop a little too. So the net activity level you perform throughout the day might not be quite as much as you would expect. This systematic review aimed to observe how exercise and diet interventions influence total daily activity levels. Of the 36 studies included in the analysis, around half of them observed decreases in NEAT levels, while the other half didn't. And it was primarily the studies which involved more intense exercise protocols and greater diet restriction which were the ones that saw compensations in NEAT levels. So, keeping track of your total daily step counts can be a way to ensure you are meeting an adequate level of general physical activity each day. This can have two positive effects for promoting a lower energy balance. First is by helping to expend a little more total energy. This directly influences the energy balance equation by increasing total daily energy expenditure. Although it should be noted that exercise doesn't have a direct linear effect on energy expenditure. The more exercise we perform, the less additional total daily energy we tend to expend. This research review aimed to explore the relationship between physical activity levels and energy expenditure. The data generally seems to support what is termed a constrained model of energy expenditure. As physical activity levels increase, other components of energy expenditure seem to decrease to compensate. So the net total daily energy expenditure we experience might not be as much as what we would expect. Although it still has a positive effect, it just means we shouldn't rely on exercise alone to promote a calorie deficit. And the second benefit is to help regulate our appetite. We generally see that people who are at least moderately active eat more in line with their biological hunger and satiety signals. This means we are less likely to eat when we don't need food and more likely to feel satiated after eating. This research review aimed to describe how exercise influences appetite control. The general consensus is that low levels of physical activity generally lead to a dysregulation in appetite, meaning people tend to eat more than they expend. Although with moderate to high levels of physical activity, our appetite falls more in line with how much energy we expend. So how many steps should you aim for each day? Well, you would want to accumulate at least a moderate step count to facilitate appetite regulation and expend a decent amount of energy, between 5 to 10,000. And ideally, to expend more energy, you would want to accumulate a high step count, between 10 to 15,000. And if it is feasible, going above 15,000 steps per day might have a small additional benefit, but it may not be worth the time and effort in most cases, unless you habitually achieve this as part of your daily schedule. And the last tip for this video is to use intuitive signals to guide eating behaviors. This refers to paying attention to your biological hunger and satiety signals and make food choices based on them. Hunger and satiety exist on a sliding spectrum, and we are always in a state somewhere along this scale. If you don't eat, there are signals that energy is low and you will gradually get hungry. And once you've eaten, there are biological signals that energy is plentiful and you will become more satiated. To maintain a healthy body weight, we ideally want to eat only at times when we are truly biologically hungry and not when we are already satiated. While this is pretty obvious, our modern environment and lifestyles often trigger us to eat at times when we aren't biologically hungry and overconsume beyond reasonable satiety. More sedentary lifestyles, easier access to high-calorie foods, and food marketing all play a role in this. And as a result, many people end up consuming a little more calories than they expend each day and gradually gain excess body fat over time. So bringing our attention back to biological signals can be a good way to eat according to your actual energy requirements. If you eat purely based on hunger and satiety signals, you would hypothetically end up maintaining a relatively lean and healthy body weight over time. If your body fat gets too low, hunger will be upregulated, and there will be a drive to eat more food. And if your body fat gets too high, hunger will be downregulated and there will be a drive to eat less food. So naturally, you would fall between an upper and lower body weight or body fat percentage. This has been described in this research review as the dual intervention theory. The upper boundary is known as the upper intervention point. As your body fat approaches this point, there will be a decreased drive to eat. And oppositely, the lower boundary is known as the lower intervention point. As your body fat approaches this point, there will be a greater drive to eat. Here are some practical tips to implement intuitive eating principles in practice. At mealtime, eat to a point where you are around an 8 out of 10 full on a subjective scale. Only eat when you feel physiologically hungry and don't eat when you aren't. In most cases, this will typically result in people consuming around 2 to 4 meals per day, and this may change between days. Ensure that the majority of your diet consists of fairly high quality foods, including fruits, vegetables, and a decent amount of protein. And it is important to consume foods that you actually prefer to eat, otherwise you will likely be left craving food if it wasn't satisfactory from a taste perspective. To summarize, let's briefly overview each tip once again. First is to track your body weight over time. Take the average trend over multiple weeks and months to determine if you were truly in a calorie deficit. And if not, you can make appropriate changes to diet and exercise behaviors. Second is to get enough sleep. Restricted sleep tends to promote an increased calorie intake and makes exercise more effortful to perform. So getting sufficient sleep will make it more likely for you to make better food decisions and make it more likely to stick with an exercise routine. Next is to cook more if it is viable. People tend to eat fewer total calories when consuming more home-cooked meals, promoting a lower total calorie intake over time. Related to cooking, the next tip is to meal prep food. This makes healthier food options more convenient so that it is more practical to consume. Next is to track your total daily step count. Step tracking is a decent practical indicator of our total daily physical activity levels, since it accounts for both intentional exercise and unintentional steps we perform throughout the day. And last is to use intuitive eating strategies to guide food choices. This can help us eat more in line with our actual energy needs and less so for emotional or environmental reasons. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.